You'd think I'd remember the exact moment my life quietly shifted course. Something loud or cinematic. But no, it started with a stubborn doorknob that refused to turn. It was a Thursday morning, and I was staring at the garage door like it had personally offended me. I'd been meaning to clean it out for years. This weekend, I'd said for the last 10 years. But now I had no choice. The door wouldn't close all the way, and the cold wind was finding its way in. I'm 62. I've lived in this house for 34 of those years. Raised 2 kids here. Watched a marriage dissolve quietly in these walls. I've seen winters come and go, friends move away, and silence settle in like a layer of dust on forgotten shelves. And now, that silence was thick in the garage, heavy with old memories and boxes stacked with God knows what. I wasn't trying to reinvent my life. I just wanted to fix the door. But the more I looked around, the more I realized how much had built up, literal clutter, yes, but also the kind that sits in your chest. Boxes with my ex-husband's tools. Bins with my daughter's college projects. A broken fan. A faded treadmill. The echoes of "I'll deal with it later" staring back at me from every corner. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me, grabbed a rusted broom, and started pushing things aside. But I could feel it already, my back tightening, my patience thinning. It was overwhelming. And that's when I heard a voice. Calm. Slightly amused. You planning to move in there or just battling it into submission? I turned, startled, broom still in hand. It was my neighbor, newer to the block, maybe a year or so. We'd said hello a few times across our driveways. I knew he lived alone. Always wore those flannel shirts that made him look like he'd walked straight out of a home repair show. Probably mid-50s. Quiet, but there was something steady about him. I think I mumbled something polite. Probably laughed awkwardly. I honestly don't remember. But I do remember the way he leaned on the fence, glancing into the chaos of my garage like it was a puzzle he could solve. And then, just like that, he asked if I needed help. I should have said no. I should have told him it wasn't a big deal, that I could handle it. That I didn't need anyone to step into this mess. But I didn't. Maybe it was the way he asked, simple, without pity. Or maybe I was just tired of facing everything alone. So I nodded. And that moment, the one where I let someone walk into my mess without cleaning it up first, was the first quiet crack in the wall I'd built around myself. He showed up the next morning with a pair of work gloves and a thermos of coffee. Hope you don't mind, he said, holding it out to me. I figured this kind of job goes better with caffeine. It was early, the air still cool and quiet. The sun hadn't yet burned through the soft gray of the sky. I hadn't planned on him actually showing up. I thought maybe it had been a polite gesture, the kind people say without meaning much. But there he was, standing in my driveway like he belonged there. I poured us each a cup and we stood for a moment, side by side, looking into the cluttered garage like it was a mountain we were about to climb. I don't even know where to begin, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. He gave a small shrug. We just start somewhere. The rest follows. There was something so simple about the way he said it. No pressure. No judgment. Just a quiet willingness to show up. We started with the obvious, broken shelves, collapsed boxes, stray garden tools that hadn't seen sunlight since Obama's first term. I found myself apologizing every few minutes, for the dust, for the mess, for the way the garden hose had fossilized into a knot. He didn't laugh or mock. He just worked. Steady hands. Quiet movements. He had this way of sorting through things like he wasn't just organizing space, but clearing it. Like he understood that every object held a weight I hadn't wanted to touch. We didn't talk much at first. Just the scrape of boxes, the occasional clink of forgotten tools hitting the workbench. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt calm. Like a deep breath after holding one for too long. Every now and then, we'd uncover something that paused us both. A stack of vinyl records, dusty but intact. My husband was into jazz, I said quietly, brushing off the cover of a Miles Davis album. Used to play it every Sunday morning while he made pancakes. He didn't ask what happened to him. He didn't have to. Later, I pulled out a box labeled College, Sarah, and froze. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were art supplies, sketchbooks, a few rolled-up posters from dorm walls. I crouched down, my fingers brushing the spine of a half-filled notebook, and felt a lump rise in my throat. She lives in Oregon now. Married. Busy. We talk, but not often. You okay? He asked, his voice low but close. I nodded too quickly. Yeah. Just memories. He didn't say anything. Just handed me a clean cloth and started wiping down a nearby shelf like it was the most natural thing in the world to give someone space without walking away. We worked for hours, the garage slowly revealing its bones, concrete floor, cracked paint, shelves that could breathe again. Somewhere between moving the ladder and untangling old Christmas lights, I caught myself watching him. Not in a romantic way, at least not then. But in that way you watch someone who feels safe. Reliable. He caught me looking once, and instead of turning away, he held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Just enough to send a ripple of something through me. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. By the time we stopped for lunch, I was sweating, dusty, and oddly lighter. The garage was still far from finished. But the air inside it had shifted. So had something in me. We sat on a pair of overturned crates just outside the garage, paper plates balanced on our knees. I'd thrown together some sandwiches and sliced fruit. Nothing fancy, but he didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed grateful. It's good, he said after a bite, nodding with approval. Simple. Real. I smiled, unsure how to respond to a compliment like that. There wasn't much pretension to him, no need to impress or embellish. It made being around him feel easy. For a while, we didn't say much. The kind of silence that would have once made me uncomfortable now felt like a soft blanket wrapped around the moment. Just the hum of a neighbor's lawnmower in the distance and the occasional bird call above. He finished his sandwich, wiped his hands on a napkin, and leaned back slightly, glancing toward the garage. You've got a good space in there, he said. It just needed breathing room. I followed his gaze. The clutter had thinned. There was light bouncing off the floor now. I could see the back wall for the first time in years. But it wasn't just the space that felt like it had room to breathe. It was me. I studied his profile for a moment. The strong, quiet lines of his face. The way he carried himself, like someone who'd lived a full life but didn't need to talk about it all the time. Have you always worked with your hands? I asked. He gave a soft chuckle. Most of my life, yeah. Used to restore old houses. Then kitchens. Built a few barns, back in the day. He paused, his eyes scanning the treetops as if they held the next sentence. Slowed down after my shoulder went out. These days, I fix what I can and let the rest be. There was something so honest about that, letting things be. I'd spent so much time trying to fix everything. The house. The marriage. Myself. Do you miss it? I asked. He looked over at me. Sometimes. The rhythm of it. The progress you can see. But not the noise. I like the quiet now. I nodded. I understood that. The craving for peace after years of too much motion. I stood to collect our plates, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Our arms had brushed a few times without either of us pulling away. Just soft, accidental touches that lingered half a second longer than they needed to. I'll get us some iced tea, I said, needing a moment to breathe. He smiled, slow and warm, and nodded. Inside the kitchen, I leaned on the counter, staring at the worn pattern on the tile floor. My heart wasn't racing, but there was a hum beneath the surface, like the low vibration of something just beginning to stir. When I brought the tea out, he was back on his feet, sorting through a pile of old paint cans. "Most of these are probably dried up," he said. "Want me to help haul them to the curb?" I nodded, handing him a glass. "Thanks again, for all of this." He tilted his head. "You're welcome. Honestly, I needed something to do today. You gave me that." We clinked glasses softly, a quiet toast to a morning that had become something more. By late afternoon, the garage was transformed. Not perfect, but functional. Clear. Like a room waiting to be repurposed, waiting for a new season of use. And maybe I was, too. We stood in the doorway, shoulder to shoulder, looking in at what we'd done. I felt taller somehow. Lighter. He glanced over at me. "You've got a good eye for order," he said. I smiled. "No, I think I just finally let go of things I didn't need." His eyes met mine, and something passed between us again. Gentle. Undeniable. I didn't know what would come of it. But in that moment, with the smell of dust and sunlight around us, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. That night, I stood at the threshold of the garage, lights off, letting the quiet settle in. It felt different. Not just because the clutter was gone, but because there was a new kind of stillness. One that didn't feel lonely. There were echoes of our work in the space, neatly stacked bins, a broom leaning in the corner, sunlight that had finally found its way to the floor. But more than that, there was presence. As if something of him lingered there. I slept deeper that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made coffee and stood barefoot by the kitchen window, watching the leaves rustle gently in the backyard. My muscles ached in that satisfying way that comes from real effort. But what stuck with me more was the memory of his voice. Calm. Grounded. Kind. I didn't see him that day. Or the next. And for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I missed him. On Sunday, I went back into the garage, not to clean, but to sit. I brought a folding chair and a second cup of coffee, just in case. Silly, I know. But I couldn't help it. The cup sat untouched. Instead, I opened one of the boxes we hadn't gotten to. It was labeled miscellaneous, in my ex-husband's handwriting. Inside were odds and ends, a broken clock, some dusty photo frames, and an old Polaroid from our first camping trip. I looked at it for a long time. We were so young. Smiling like nothing could ever touch us. But life had. I placed the photo aside and kept digging. Underneath it all, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a tiny music box. I hadn't seen it in years. It had been a gift from my daughter when she was 10, something she'd picked out with her allowance. A little wooden box with a clunky winding key and a chipped ballerina that twirled offbeat. I wound it up, not expecting it to work. But it did. A slow, creaky melody filled the quiet, and my chest ached with something soft and sharp all at once. That's when I heard footsteps on gravel. I looked up, startled. And there he was again, standing in the sunlight, hands in his pockets. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said gently. "You're not," I replied. "I was just revisiting old dust." He smiled at that, stepping closer, glancing at the open box and the twirling ballerina. "She's a little off-key," I said. He crouched beside me, studying the box. "Still playing though. That counts for something." We didn't say anything for a while. Just listened to the final notes before the mechanism wound down into silence. "I found some old stuff yesterday too," he finally said. Cleaning out a drawer. Came across a photo of my dad fixing the brakes on my first car. I was maybe 17. Arms full of grease, big grin on his face like he'd just solved a mystery. There was something in his voice then, a tenderness that made me sit still, like moving might break the spell. He died the next year, he continued, quietly. Never got to see me finish school. I looked at him. Really looked. And in that moment, he didn't feel like a stranger at all. He felt like someone I'd known longer than just a few days. Someone who understood that life isn't about the big declarations or grand gestures, but about the small, honest things we carry. I'm sorry, I whispered. He nodded, not to dismiss it, but to accept it. It's okay. I think, sometimes the people we lose make room for the ones we haven't met yet. I let that sit between us for a while. The air was warm. The garage, open. And my heart, surprisingly, quietly, was too. The next weekend, I was pulling old cardboard boxes to the edge of the driveway when he appeared again, same flannel shirt, same quiet energy. No announcement, no question. Just a small wave and a pair of gloves in his back pocket. You back at it? He asked casually, eyeing the growing pile of things I'd finally decided to let go. I figured it's time, I said. If I don't do it now, these boxes will be my grandkids' problem one day. He chuckled and stepped closer. Need a second pair of hands? I hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Always. And just like that, we were a team again. The pace was slower this time. Not the heavy lifting of the first clean out, but a gentler sorting, what to donate, what to toss, what deserved a second chance. Some things made us laugh, a box of VHS tapes labeled important, with nothing inside but tangled cords. Others made me pause, a bag of old winter coats, one still carrying my ex's cologne. I didn't say anything. Just folded it quietly and placed it in the donation bin. But he seemed to notice anyway. You sure you're okay letting that one go? He asked softly. I'm not sure about a lot of things, I admitted. But I think I'm done carrying things I don't wear anymore, inside or out. He didn't reply. Just gave a small nod that said he understood more than he let on. At one point, while shifting a heavy crate, we both reached for the same side at once, and our hands met, firm and full. Not a brush this time. Not a glance. Just skin on skin, pressed there longer than necessary. We both froze. Not awkwardly. Just aware. I looked up. He was already looking at me. There was no smirk, no joke to cut the tension. Just quiet recognition. Something had shifted again. Neither of us said anything about it. We finished the job by late afternoon. The driveway was clear, the garage breathing easier. And my heart, somehow, felt both full and exposed, like a door I hadn't meant to leave open. Do you want to come in for a drink? I asked. Just water. Or tea, if you're into that kind of thing. He smiled. Tea sounds good. Inside, the house was cool and still. I filled the kettle while he looked around the living room, at the bookshelf, the old family photos, the patchwork quilt folded over the arm of the sofa. Cozy, he said quietly. Feels lived in. In a good way. I've lived in it a long time, I replied, setting 2 mugs on the counter. But sometimes, I think it's been living in me too. He glanced at me then, not in confusion, but in a way that told me he knew exactly what I meant. We sat in the kitchen, steam curling from our mugs, the late daylight spilling in through the curtains. No music. No background noise. Just the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic and the kind of silence you don't feel the need to fill. After a few sips, he leaned back and looked at me, really looked. You're strong, he said suddenly. Stronger than you let on. I didn't know what to say. Compliments at this stage in life feel less like flattery and more like surprise packages, unexpected, disarming. I think I just got used to holding everything up, I said finally. Even when I didn't know why. That's the thing about strength, he murmured. Sometimes it doesn't look like what we expect. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing dry leaves across the porch. A gust rattled the window gently, but inside, everything felt still. Safe. And for the first time in a long while, I let that stillness sink in. That evening, I found myself setting the table without fully realizing why. 2 plates. 2 cloth napkins. I even lit the candle in the center, half-burned and dusty from disuse. Something about the glow made the kitchen feel warmer, more intimate. It had been years since I'd had someone sit across from me at that table just to share a meal. Not out of obligation or routine, but choice. He hadn't left right after tea. We'd talked. Slowly, gently. About unremarkable things, weather patterns, favorite meals, the difference between silence and loneliness. At some point, the conversation wandered into memory. I told him about the summer I tried to grow tomatoes and ended up with a squirrel buffet. About how I used to bake on Sundays just to make the house smell like someone cared. He told me about a fishing trip gone wrong, about a dog he'd rescued who ended up rescuing him. There was no rush to the exchange. Just a slow unfolding, like leaves drifting down in early fall, each one soft, deliberate, revealing. You know, I said, somewhere in the quiet between stories, I've got some leftover roast chicken. And potatoes. Would you stay for dinner? He looked at me for a second, then nodded with that soft smile of his. I'd like that. So I cooked. Not for show. Not to impress. Just to share. While the chicken warmed in the oven, I chopped a few vegetables, put on soft music, old jazz, the kind that reminded me of Sunday mornings long ago. I caught my reflection in the microwave door at one point, hair a little messy, cheeks a little flushed, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in years. He helped without asking. Set the water glasses. Opened the window a crack. It all felt easy, unforced. Like we'd done this before in some other version of life. Dinner was quiet. Peaceful. We talked between bites, not over them. He complimented the potatoes. I laughed and told him they were the one thing I could never mess up. You know, he said slowly, this reminds me of something. I raised an eyebrow. Dinner? He nodded. But not just the food. The feel of it. The stillness. Like the world's out there doing its thing, but in here, it doesn't matter. I knew exactly what he meant. I'd forgotten what that felt like. To sit with someone without needing to entertain them. Without worrying what came next. Just the warmth of food, the glow of the candle, and the steady presence of another soul across the table. After dinner, we washed the dishes together. Side by side at the sink, like an old rhythm we were just now remembering. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, and I caught myself watching the way his forearms moved, strong, capable, gentle. At one point, I passed him a wet plate and our fingers touched. It wasn't dramatic. Just a pause. A heartbeat. But it settled in my chest like a stone dropped in water, soft, deep, rippling. He looked at me then, not just glanced, but looked. And I felt it again. That shift. That unspoken something between us gaining weight, shape, possibility. Thank you, I said quietly. Not just for today. For showing up. For seeing me. His expression softened. You make it easy. We stood there in that moment, surrounded by steam and quiet music, neither of us moving to break the spell. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. There was a stillness in the house, the kind that didn't feel empty this time. Just calm. Like something had finally settled. I wrapped myself in a sweater, made coffee, and walked barefoot to the garage. The air inside held a faint chill, but the space felt warmer than it ever had. Maybe because it wasn't just a garage anymore. It was where I'd started letting go. And letting someone in. The light outside was just beginning to shift, the soft gray before gold. I stood in the doorway, sipping coffee, remembering his smile from the night before, the way his eyes had held mine without rushing, without demand. And I smiled too. Later that day, I heard a gentle knock at the back door. It was him, again. Always without fanfare, without force. Just showing up. He held something in his hand. "I found this in my attic last night," he said, holding out a small, old lantern. "Thought it might suit your garage. A little light never hurts." I took it carefully, the metal cool in my hands. "It's beautiful." He shrugged. "It's simple. But it works." I knew, somehow, that he wasn't just talking about the lantern. We walked to the garage together and hung it by the door. He tested the switch, and it flickered to life, soft, amber, warm. The space glowed. Not brightly. Just enough. We didn't say much after that. Instead, we stood there in the soft light, surrounded by the quiet order we'd created together. Eventually, he turned toward me, his voice low. "I've been on my own a long time." "So have I," I said. He nodded, looking down for a moment. "I think I forgot what it felt like to be needed, not for fixing something, but just for being there." I felt something stir in my chest. A familiar ache, but gentler now. Like something healing. "You were," I said. "Exactly that." His hand brushed mine, just a small movement. Natural. Earnest. Not asking for anything, just offering presence. And I didn't pull away. We stood like that for a while, hands barely touching, as if testing the weight of connection, not rushing toward it, not defining it, just letting it exist. Two people in their second act, standing in a quiet garage, under a flickering light. Not a love story. Not yet. Maybe never. But something just as meaningful. A remembering. A return. That evening, after he'd gone, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a small note to myself on the back of an old recipe card. I folded it and tucked it into a drawer. It simply said, "You are still capable of being seen. And more than that, you are worth seeing." The next day, I opened the garage again. Just because. Let the light spill in, let the air move through it. Let the memories settle into the corners like good dust. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't afraid of what might. I was open to it. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and write to the bell, and share your impressions of listening to this story in the comments. Thank you for watching.